I'm Katherine Marconi, and during COVID, my background is I'm an epidemiologist. I worked in global health with Jody Olson, who's sitting here. I worked in local public health in Pennsylvania and state public health. And in the US, I worked in AIDS care with the Ryan White Care Act, which was the first legislation passed providing funding for AIDS care and treatment. So during COVID, I got bored. And I began to wonder what other epidemics have occurred in Maryland. So I started doing research, and I'm a volunteer for the Oxford Library, and they have a lot of old history books. So between that and not being able to travel or do anything else I thought I'd do in retirement, I put this together. There are 5 sections, and what I thought I'd do is go through each section, which I'll show you in a minute, and then we can stop and have a discussion. Is anybody here a clinician or works in? What's your background?
Pediatric, specializing in infectious diseases. My research was in vaccine development.
Great. Wow. Great. Well, I am not a clinician, so you are welcome to jump in and answer any clinical questions that come up. Is anybody a historian? No. Okay.
You're in the section.
Well, I'm not either, so I'm taking what I read and using it. Okay. So with that, we can start.
You just click on it. Sure.
You can also do it on this. Yes.
It got moved. Yeah, here. Just put that right here.
There we go. Okay. So the 5 topics I organized the research into are an overview of epidemics in Maryland: smallpox, yellow fever, typhoid fever, and 1918 influenza. After that list, if you don't want to stay, I understand. So we'll start with the overview, and then we'll stop for discussion. I found this print on the St. Mary's Historical Society website. And it's a print about the need to prepare for burial as European settlers came into the country. And one of the quotes from St. Mary's was that Talbot County in the mid-1600s carried their own set of diseases. They found a hot climate in summer and marshes. Coming to early Maryland was a major risk for immigrants. Epidemics followed these immigrants.
Raise the phone, I think.
And then I sent you all this poem that's from 1708. I felt a fever intermitting, a fiery pulse beat in my veins. From cold I felt resembling pains. This cursed season I remember. And what the historians thought it sounded like was malaria because of the march to cold December and the fever. And this is a map of malaria in the US in the 1800 period. And you can see us right at the corner there, and we're in red. So it was a malaria favorable climate. Now, how did malaria get here? Well, it could have come from both Europe and Africa. And here we get into commerce because, yes, absolutely.
And the islands where some of the trade was going.
Yes. And it was the trade loop of slaves from Africa here our goods to Europe and then European ships to Africa to obtain slaves. So malaria was a real issue. And there's one epidemiological fact or tool that I want to introduce you to. It's the only one. And that's the epidemic curve of malaria, which is, this is for malaria, and it was an outbreak in 2017 in Sierra Leone. But you can see how the reported cases go up and then go down. It's an inverted V or U shape, basically. And that's typical of epidemics.
Now, this is a very short timeline, though. Is that because in 2017 we had malaria shots?
Yes, yes. And we have malaria, it's not a vaccine, but it's pills you can take to prevent it, so also. So,
I've had to take some others.
yes, anybody who's traveled to a southern climate probably has taken them. So we've been in our arsenal today, which we didn't have then. And they also did not know that it was mosquitoes that caused malaria or many of the other diseases. And you can see, and this is just one COVID set of curves from Hopkins. You can see how the curves go up and down over time, over a longer period of time, what you just mentioned, Lynn.
But look at the interesting thing there is the tips in January every year is people are suddenly really at home or indoors with other people.
Right, and you hear arguments that the cases are underreported or the deaths are overreported, but if you look at all three curves together, they follow the same pattern. So something's going on there.
They're doing it the same way.
Yes. So, and they're completely different data sets, so you're not going to get the same curves, right? Cases come from health departments, pharmacies, physicians. Deaths come from hospitals, other places where people die in the hospitalizations, but they're usually in a different data set, your electronic health records. So, one of the first things I found, and for people online, this is a 9-page list of epidemics in Maryland.
Goodness.
And there's one small part of it on the screen. It's from 1752 to 1920. So it's not even a complete list. But you can see in the 17 and 1800s, all of the epidemics, and these are just handpicked from the 9 pages, some of the more recent ones. Recent ones.
How do you define epidemic?
Good question.
Yeah.
Jody, you want to answer that?
Well,
You had to deal with it, right?
yes, I had to deal with it. Yes, boy, did I have to deal with it. It's when you've got enough and it's pervasive enough and it's serious enough that the risk is,
It's elevated.
it's really elevated. And so as you watch COVID, it elevated very quickly over a 2-month period, January, February, March, into the end of March, and from almost nothing in Wuhan to the world, and the world closed down by the end of March. So it was elevating to a point that countries would not let international flights come and go, and literally closed their borders, country by country.
I was in the Antarctic. The first case reported from Wuhan.
Oh,
Uh,
you were in the Antarctic.
Yeah,
Probably the only safe place.
Probably.
Assuming nobody gets to come
I
in.
came
at that
home
moment.
anyway.
And this,
Well, I understand. I mean, obviously, we've lived through COVID and know that. So I'm just kind of wondering with these others, like a measles epidemic, what that might have looked like to the people back then as far as the impact and the numbers.
Lot of deaths.
Yeah, in Baltimore alone, 436 deaths.
that's smallpox.
Yeah, smallpox, yeah.
That was
vitamin A deficiency, measles carries very high mortality, which is why pre-vaccine in Africa, you saw a lot of deaths.
And epidemics can be in a community, they can be in a country, or it can be a pandemic.
Yeah, it's just an outbreak, right?
Yeah.
A pandemic is when it's around the entire world.
Oh, so they're defining a difference between outbreak and pandemic. So
Pandemic is worldwide. Pain.
Any other thoughts or questions about this just broad picture? I mean, I was stunned at 9 pages of this for
just
short
from
time.
Maryland.
Jody or Jerry, do you have any questions?
No,
Okay.
Can you hear okay? I
pretty
know.
much, yeah.
Okay.
So let's go on to smallpox. And just some basic facts that relates to your question about measles, but this is smallpox. If you have 100 people infected, it's very contagious if you have prolonged contact with pox or bedclothes. So you know, brushing up against somebody in the store is not going to give you smallpox. Caring for them will. Okay, so all will develop pox if you're exposed to the pox, and you're only infectious if you have the pox. And this applies to monkeypox, which I put up there too, which is now in 92 countries, I read this morning. So it takes 17 to 17 days to develop pox. Until you develop them, you're not infectious. It's different than COVID. There are vaccines available. You can treat symptoms, but there are really no treatments for smallpox, though they are developing antiretrovirals, and I don't know if you're testing them yet or not.
So monkeypox is a form of smallpox.
It's related to it, but it's a much milder version. Your death is.
And they were using a smallpox vaccine for prevention. I was involved with a set of vaccine development. Remember when there was concern, political concern, that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iran or Iraq, which turned out not to be true, but there was concern that we wouldn't have enough smallpox vaccine, and so we looked at diluting the smallpox vaccine. And
Did you test that diluted version to see?
yeah, one of my volunteers was a USA newspaper reporter, so she signed up.
And you can see in the past, 30 out of 100 people might die. So, but monkeypox is not smallpox.
Right.
So very, very different. So it came to the Eastern Shore in the 1600s, smallpox, because many of the European settlers had it or brought it with them. And it's person-to-person transmission. And this shows the number of smallpox cases recorded in the US from 1900 to 1952. And again, the epidemic curve, right?
Isn't that when that's where I think I saw the pictures in New York and people learning to wear masks?
Yes. Yes. So on the Eastern Shore, it didn't initially affect the Eastern Shore that much because there were plantations which were separate from each other. There weren't a lot of towns, so there, you know, a plantation might get it, but the next one wouldn't.
It's like its own little community.
Right. But where hit here was it decimated the Native Americans. I found that the Nanticokes, Choptanks, the Susquehanna, further, were decimated. The Nanticokes went from several thousand on their lands to, I think it was 10 or 12. I mean,
Oh, my
just
word.
totally decimated.
Wow.
Populations haven't developed any immunity.
Especially to anything that Anglos would bring over from Europe.
It also impacted, once towns started to develop, it impacted politics, which I found interesting. Mr. Shaw called together the Maryland Assembly during the French and Indian Wars, and they had to move it from Annapolis to Baltimore because of the smallpox outbreak in Annapolis. And then the Maryland Assembly again in 1765 wanted to react to the Stamp Act. Other colonies were, stop it, saying they wouldn't go along with it. They had to postpone it from March to September because of the smallpox outbreak. So we delayed our reaction during the pre-Civil War, I guess. I mean, Revolutionary
And
War.
we did quite a lot of that here in America too, with COVID.
Yeah.
Changed the way we vote and all those kinds of things.
Very political.
So George Washington's trying to fight the Revolutionary War, and he sees his troops beginning to get smallpox, and he's worried more of them will die than being killed by the British. So what does he do? Finding the smallpox to be spreading, he asks his chief physician to inoculate the army quietly, and he uses the word privately.
So what kind of inoculation did they have then?
Well, it was pretty scary because they didn't have smallpox vaccines. The Chinese, early Europeans had all figured out that if you took some pox off a person, some of the pox, and put it on another person with the scab,
Scarf.
they would get a mild case, in most cases, of smallpox.
And that was enough to defend against getting it.
Upgrade immunity.
The more widespread use was from cowpox.
Yes.
Were you going to talk about?
No, go ahead, you can do it.
It was noted that, well, milkmaid's complexion term, and somebody figured out, some smart person figured out, it's because they got cowpox from the udders. And that was very, very mild, and protected them against
So they would get
smallpox.
facial scars?
Well, they wouldn't scar. No, they would get a mild pox disease.
Oh,
They
interesting.
didn't get the terrible facial scar. And so cowpox was, they actually would create, scrape the skin, it's kind of disgusting here, but they would scrape the skin of a cow and paint it with blister lesions from somebody with cowpox, and they would scrape off the fluid, and that was the vaccine.
I wonder how the physician of those days came up with that solution. That's just amazing.
Yeah.
Probably somebody who came here from Europe and knew somebody in Europe who
Well,
had done
I
that.
think, it came from France, I think, Pasteur Institute.
Oh, okay,
Pasteur.
that makes sense.
Would this have been before germ theory?
It was before viruses were understood.
Because otherwise, weren't the settlers really reliant on herbals?
Yes, and I'm going to get to that
Yeah.
and to the physicians here in
Okay.
a second. But thank you, that was a good explanation of cowpox. Here, Henry Stevenson, MD, he erected a stone mansion in Baltimore, just north of the site of the present city jail, where he paid for an inoculating hospital, which wasn't really a hospital per se, but people came to the clinic. He probably kept cows and inoculated people, because it wasn't until 1796 that Edward Jenner figured out the smallpox vaccine.
Huh.
So
Who was it? Jenner is what national, where is he?
England?
Yeah.
He was
England. So he was an advocate of vaccination and brought it to Maryland. And we also get the beginning of anti-vaccination societies. And those are around smallpox. Liberty cannot be given, it must be taken.
And there were amazing cartoons of, did you come across some
No.
of those? Of cows coming out of people's arms.
Oh, yes, I read that. They thought your face would take on the shape of a cow.
But that last part,
Not that you
tyrannical
sun.
violation of individual liberty,
Right.
it could have been out of yesterday's newspaper.
Yeah, and the concern about the safety of the vaccine.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, nothing ever changes, does it?
It doesn't.
Unfortunately.
It doesn't. So that's basically, oh, and also the other political consequence was that President Madison formed the United States Vaccine Agency around smallpox in 1813.
Did that become the FDA then, or?
No, it didn't. That's way before
Yeah.
maternal health programs or FDA. FDA is 1910 or something, so
Oh.
this is, I don't know what happened to it, but it basically an overview of what I found of smallpox.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts or?
Well, we've had some really good discussion as we go,
Yeah.
so sorry.
No,
We don't hold ourselves back.
That's small enough, we can do that. Great.
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I got a little sugar cube with something on it, and what vaccine was that?
That was polio.
That was
Polio.
What was the one that went in our arm?
Yeah, the big multi-use shot one.
They're both were polio.
Oh, they were?
Really? Yeah.
And,
Oh,
yeah, even
Did they do the
today,
arm and
there's
then
an
give you the
oral
sugar as
and
a reward?
Yeah.
No, one
vaccine.
an oral.
I was a little kid.
Is that still the way they do
Why
it?
would I remember
In
going to the armory here
Oh,
and getting my polio vaccine.
Huh.
Oh, one more polio story, which I don't know if it's true or not. This is from Ghost Stories or something, the Eastern Shore, but I thought it was great, and it showed what did happen in other places later on.
Are you talking smallpox still, or?
I think I am talking about smallpox.
Smallpox,
Woodland had an outbreak. You see Woodland in the middle and the
Just on the other side of the Delaware line.
just on the other side, and the towns surrounding Woodland quarantined the town. No goods or services could come in or out,
Oh,
No good. Wow.
and supposedly people starved to death.
Oh, my word.
in Woodland,
In
or
Woodland.
in all three of those?
In Woodland, no, the others did not get, I'm not sure if this was smallpox or yellow fever, I think it was smallpox, but the other towns did not get it because the isolation was,
Uh-huh.
there were patrols they sent out at night to make sure people didn't sneak through, and Easton did that later on. Yeah, that was smallpox, here we go.
Smallpox you can see, so, it's the way they eliminated smallpox was finally, I think it was Ethiopia, the last case, they paid money for it, once it became rare, for anybody to report smallpox.
And when settlers were heading west, and now that probably was later than this though, where they would literally kill somebody that was on the wagon train and came down with one of these diseases just to protect everybody else. And I heard about it on shipboards too, that that ships coming into America, from Europe, that if somebody got sick, they would toss them overboard.
Yes,
That was, wow.
on slave ships.
Yes,
They
yes,
especially
yeah.
did that. So that's just an example of isolation and quarantine. that
It
happens
is,
on
if
this
you think
shore.
about it, yeah, yeah. And even those two examples, that's another example of isolation and quarantine. They just didn't have any place to quarantine them,
Right.
so
They
Off
just
you go.
threw them off.
bye, and nice knowing you.
Okay, yellow fever. That was very prevalent over here because it's spread by a mosquito. And until Easton, they cleared them in the 1800s, trying to reduce the incidence of yellow fever. But it wasn't until they really got a sewer system that, well, that typhoid fever, other illnesses like that,
Mosquito-borne
mosquito-borne.
diseases. How did they clear the marshes?
Typhoid's notoriously important.
Wayne Bell talks about that, because they also cleared it to make more farmland as well.
So they built up barriers basically.
I think they made
Everybody else to do.
That was it.
Food, but it was in the water system and it was
Typhoid
going,
feces.
but it was going into these wetland areas because there was no sewer system. So yellow fever, if you take 100 people, about 33 will have mild symptoms. But of the people with mild symptoms, 2 to 9 go to develop severe symptoms, and 1 to 6 may die. Again, there's no treatment other than symptomatic treatment at this point, but there is a vaccine to prevent it, which most of us here have.
And is that another one where until they actually exhibit symptoms, they aren't sharing it?
No, I think typhoid, because it's mosquito borne, you may have no symptoms, but if you have the virus, when the mosquito bites you, it will get the virus.
Right.
And then there's an incubation period, and then it will infect people. So you don't have to have the symptoms to be infectious.
That's true of any virus, right? No?
No, but smallpox is a virus.
Okay.
No, my question would be, what is it about a virus that determines if it can be transmitted by a mosquito from an infected individual to another?
Yeah, what makes mosquitoes such great carriers?
Well, if the virus is in blood,
Oh, that makes sense. Because then, and they can share, that's when we see some viruses shared between other mammals and humans then probably too.
one of the reasons.
Because I'm thinking about it, I know there's quite a few that mosquitoes can spread, but ones like HIV, for instance, wouldn't be spread from simply a mosquito bite. I know, that's what I'm wondering. I wonder if some viruses break down from that process.
Yeah, I think, I don't know for sure either, but I think the mosquito has to be a host for the virus that the virus can live in.
Oh,
So that it doesn't kill the
It has to be
mosquito,
compatible.
but mosquito likes
So
our
the mosquito, not just with us.
Gotcha.
but the Mosquito.
Yeah, I'm not sure,
You're saying the mosquito would have to actually have the virus infect itself?
And carries the virus
Gotcha.
to infect a person.
Because otherwise we'd have mosquitoes that have, you know,
Kinds of
things
things.
going
Yeah.
everywhere.
And Jerry, you have a question?
No, I have a historical comment. People from Baltimore, Maryland may have heard of Benjamin Latrobe. He designed the cathedral in Baltimore and was one of the initial designers of the U.S. Capitol. I'd always wondered where and how he died, and then I found out he died of yellow fever when he went down to New Orleans to do a job.
Wow. So we got it in New Orleans, even though there were so many marshland issues around Washington D.C. That's funny. Interesting.
So this is a picture of Spring Grove Hospital. And that was authorized in 1797 as a mental hospital. However, its other purpose was when there were outbreaks of smallpox or yellow fever or other diseases, they could isolate people in the hospital.
The smallpox wing.
Yeah. And usually it was very poor people, which I'll get into in a minute. Before I do, this is Dr. Analis Martin, who is from the Eastern Shore. And he wrote about the yellow fever epidemics and of other epidemics in 1813 and 1814. And the Maryland Medical Society actually has his records and his writings on their website. And it's fascinating to read him. He was a proponent of smallpox vaccinations. He really pushed them. He did, with another physician, think that a comet passing by caused one outbreak. They just had no idea of germs or, it's like when AIDS started, we thought Haitians, right, spread it.
I didn't know.
Yes.
Well, apparently gay men would go to Haiti and have sex with
Oh, was that
Haitian men
one?
and
Oh,
bring it back.
But there were all these rumors to stay away from Haitians, which had nothing to do with it. And what Dr. Analis Martin talks about is, this is Fells Point in Baltimore, and this one street is Caroline Street, and it was an open sewer pit, basically, where all kinds of human waste, lots of mosquitoes, flowed right into the harbor. So you have ships coming into the harbor bringing diseases from Europe and Africa. You have this open sewer pit there. And what do you get? You get
Mosquitoes breeding in that.
you get yellow fever epidemics. So here's an 1876 yellow fever epidemic. There used to be a Marine Hospital, U.S. Marine Hospital near Hopkins. And authorities had all the people living in this infected area by the harbor. And the map I just showed you, I guess I can go back. Yeah. So they took a 6-block area around the harbor, which was basically tenements in those days.
Yeah.
Forcibly took out all the people, put them in the hospital, the U.S. Marine Hospital. The ones that they couldn't fit in there, they put in an encampment on the east side of Baltimore. They went through everyone's house, sprayed the houses, threw out some of the clothes, because they weren't sure. They thought it was night vapors that caused it at this point. Yellow fever. And then when, of course, the people in the hospital, nobody else contracted it because the mosquitoes weren't there. They also sprayed the standing water with whatever they used for disinfectant. And then when the yellow fever number of cases were close to zero, they let everybody out of the hospital and the encampment to go back to Fells Point. So when you think of today, I mean, what happened in COVID, it was nothing like this.
Kind of like what China's done.
Yes.
Yeah.
They're forcing people out of their homes.
And disinfecting, yeah.
And apparently people have starved to death because they're not allowed out.
Right, they weren't allowed out and food didn't get to them in time or enough food.
One thing is for the sterilizing of everything, did they use like vinegar? Did they use alcohol? What were some of the things they had at the time? Because I'm guessing they wouldn't have had like modern day bleach ammonia.
No Lysol.
Like that, no Lysol.
What, for another instance, I read alcohol, but,
Well, in standing water, apparently you could put oil and the mosquitoes couldn't merge.
Well, that's interesting.
So anyway, quarantine, isolation is very historic. Also, wait, let me go back 1 minute. Quarantine can also be, as I showed before on the map, among cities. Well, Baltimore, in another yellow fever epidemic, had more cases than Philadelphia or Boston or New York. So those cities and Virginia and Delaware stopped all trading with Baltimore.
Oh, wow.
All goods and services were stopped
Mhm.
to try and prevent the spread of the yellow fever epidemic. So, you read about New York State during COVID wanting to look at people's vaccination records that were driving through. Well,
Right.
this is a history going back here. So I think that's enough about yellow fever. I'm not going to go too much into typhoid fever. I want to talk about commerce a bit, except to say in typhoid fever is caused by bacteria. So now we're on bacteria, not viruses. 30 to 40 could die without it. People of 100 could die without antibiotics. And there's long-term issues if bacterial infections persist.
Shutting your poop.
Yep, that's how you
Which is why we teach children
to wash
their
their
hands.
And this is just a curve that shows a 2017 typhoid fever outbreak.
What was that one that they had at the same times? That was that smallpox.
Yellow fever.
Yellow fever at
Yellow
the same
fever.
time.
Now, where was this?
South Africa though. This is South Africa, so it's a different,
There's a vaccine,
yeah. Right, and,
which actually was developed at University.
oh, really?
And that goes back quite a ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, TY21A.
Yeah.
So what people used, which was asked before, right, were basically patent medicines. And they also got from Native Americans plants that this may or may not treat fevers. I looked, some of the sites were saying yes, some were saying no, so.
There are a lot of medicinals. In fact, we have a couple of people in this area that have done a lot of research on that. I want to get them to come and talk to us.
Oh, yes, that would be good. And this is what's called flattening the curve. That's what those medicines were trying to do, right? Instead of having the brown shaded large number of people, they were trying to put protective measures, flatten the curve to fewer people.
But when you think about that, is it better to have it, when you elongate the curve like that, that means it's continuing on quite a lot longer. I'm wondering if you have the same number of people who die as would have been that.
Yes, this is a little off. Usually you don't. Usually you don't.
Well, I wonder if this is almost the idea with COVID, the whole concept of
Yeah.
do you vaccinate and have this become a much more long-term sort of thing,
More mild.
or not vaccinate, have it take its toll very quickly and harshly, and
Mhm.
kind of two different approaches.
Yeah.
What this doesn't show though is the number of deaths. If you don't vaccinate, the deaths, it can be a lot higher with COVID. You're right, not necessarily the number of cases, but the deaths.
Plus the overwhelming of medical systems and all of that as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that shows that with healthcare system capacity, you're going
Yeah.
way over any
Right.
capacity.
Yeah.
I was CDC vaccine advisory committee. We had this difficult discussion at one point when a bad flu was coming through, limited vaccine. What group should you prioritize? Elderly or healthcare workers?
Oh, wow.
Um,
Good choice.
And yeah, it was going on with a lot of the COVID conversations too.
Yes, did you have that in the Peace Corps?
Yeah, we very much had that. And actually, when I was up doing the visiting thing at Harvard, we were looking at COVID and we had 2 or 3 people come in and talk literally about what are the priorities when the vaccines were just coming out. Well, yeah, there we were. I was the top priority.
Yeah, and I mean, do you protect the elderly or those who are essential for maintaining,
And what
society's
was,
function?
and the ultimate decision was,
The elderly.
really?
Yeah, to the elderly in part because if you, then the healthcare, they're taking care of the elderly, don't get
Have
sick.
less work to do.
Because the elderly.
Well, I think that, well, actually, I talked with somebody who was on the FDA advisory committee about, what was the reason? And it's because otherwise, if we didn't do the elderly, our healthcare system would be overwhelmed.
Right.
There's so many,
Because it's so easy
Now
to
you're
Because
really
you're
sick.
being hospitalized,
Yeah,
real
and
sick.
Yeah,
fill up the ICU.
what did they say, 85% of the deaths were people 65 and over?
yeah.
It's still,
And,
Yeah.
and that's because of so many underlying conditions that go along with it, right?
Right.
in part.
In part.
Yeah,
Not totally.
one's immune system as they age
It just diminishes.
diminishes.
Don't get any older.
That's right.
Well, there's only one other option.
I don't know.
Since we're on the Eastern Shore, I thought I'd talk a little bit about oysters and typhoid fever.
Oh, good grief. Oh, dear.
No, we're okay. In 1924-25, there was an outbreak of typhoid fever, and they figured out, they suspected it was from the oysters. And the whole oyster industry along the East Coast collapsed. All the people with jobs in it, from the fishermen,
Yeah.
the shuckers, it all collapsed because no one wanted to eat oysters. And then what some medical researchers going back state is that one of the practices from the whole East Coast that was suspected is was known to be and now is known to be dangerous is the drinking or floating or fattening of oysters. So the oysters grew in salt water, and after being removed from the beds, it was the custom to put them in brackish water, often near the cities where pollution with sewage existed, right? There were a lot of comprehensive sewer systems.
So they would harvest them and they would keep them there so they'd be alive still.
and get bigger,
Oh.
or it happens.
Well, the interesting thing is, because oysters act like a filter, they
Yeah.
are tremendous for filtering out the water, so it's a smart idea to help clean the water, but then you have oysters that are. No wonder they're getting bigger.
Make sure the water doesn't have typhoid in it or whatever.
It's like taking out the filter from something, from an air vent, and then, turning it into a mask.
Yeah, right.
And because of this, that sounds horrible. Jeez.
Says the science teacher over here.
Yes.
Well, I can make it worse. There's an infectious disease meeting in Orleans and they collect you deposit some of your poop. And they want it along with your history of eating oysters and gillibrand. I think people know. Okay, next slide.
Yeah.
Next slide, please.
But this also did lead to strengthening of state and federal regulations of the food industry.
In particular, the oysters.
The oysters.
That's why I like them cooked.
Okay, I thought you'd appreciate that anyway. And then, really, the last area I looked at, I have a few polio slides, but I'm not going to go into that today, unless, somebody really wants to. But the 1918 flu epidemic, so we're skipping to 1918. It's caused by the H1N1 virus. Genes are related to avian origin, pretty sure. And 1/3 of the world's population became infected with this virus.
Wow. Does that mean that once they were infected, that 1/3 were immune if they didn't die?
Well,
I,
and I don't know how they would figure out whether
I,
they became infected.
it's a guess.
It
It's a
had to
guess.
have been.
It's a guess.
They didn't even know
The
that
populations
I mean-
of some of these areas.
it was, well, they didn't even know it was a virus. So,
But the World War I claimed an estimated 16 million lives, and the CDC is estimating, the epidemic killed about 50 million people worldwide.
I could see how that would happen in World War I because men were fighting and training dirty and.
And there's a book, called The Great Influenza, which is very interesting.
Yes.
It's thought to have started in a troop training facility in Kansas. And the general who's head of it, they was under such pressure to send troops to the front that, even though the guys were sick.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And about 25% died, but that really varied depending on age and other factors. And it was the opposite of COVID because I think age 10 to 35 was the group
That caught it.
that were most likely to die from it.
Huh. Now, H1N1 is that not involved in the COVID virus too? Do I know? I mean, I heard that term used with it.
They're the spike proteins of the influenza virus, the hemoglobin base.
So that's
So
the-
it's different,
Yeah.
but they're starting to use the mRNA technique to try to develop rapidly influenza vaccines. So,
And so flu is really a different type of virus.
yeah.
That's why you can get both shots together. You
Right.
can get the flu and COVID. I mean, they're not
Right.
as direct.
Dude, would it take us too far away if I asked her a little bit more about the mRNA?
No,
Because I'm curious about that because we hear all these things that, oh, it's not safe or blah, blah, blah. Can you tell us a little bit about what exactly that is and how it works?
Try.
I know,
The
sort of.
DNA in your cell is a mirror image is made, which is carried to another, which is RNA. That is carried to an organelle in your cell. And that carried copy is messenger RNA. So what they did was they were able to create the messenger RNA of COVID virus and use that, inject it into your body so that your body then made antibodies to the messenger RNA that controlled the production of the spike virus on COVID. So that if you then got COVID, you've already got antibodies, which will neutralize it. Was that a?
Yeah, that makes
Sure.
sense.
So now, what they're now is trying to develop a nose spray mRNA vaccine, because that's your first line of defense.
Mm,
yeah.
So that would be better.
So that differs from our normal vaccinations, which are basically infecting us with a little, sort of like the old scratch thing, infecting us with the virus. And then we defend against that.
You're making your own.
Yeah,
right.
so this is just taking a different path to get to the same
A
solution.
brand new path that is opening up, I think, the fields of vaccinology. Because it can be done so quickly.
Yeah,
It's like the current influenza vaccines, first of all, you have to figure out which one's gonna come through. So the WHO has testing sites all over the country. Just come to the southern hemisphere, first. So then the FDA said, okay, we think it's gonna be this one or these coming through. So then they send out cultures to the pharmaceutical companies who have to grow it up in embryonated eggs. And then they separate off the certain and they make it into a vaccine. So it's a very critical process. They may not get it out in time. They may misguess what's going to come through. And this will just speed up that process so much.
And it can be used for the other
And
diseases.
does that all come from all of our, in the last 2 decades at least, all of the work that we've done with being able to, DNA and all that, so that we can get to these issues so much faster.
What's sad about the 1918 flu is that most of the people died of pneumonia, which was a complication of flu in the people.
He died very rapidly.
Yes, yeah,
And
but,
that was.
But Jerry had a question.
oh,
Can we
okay,
pick
wait.
him up then?
If it had come 10 years later, in 1928, antibiotics,
Would have solved that.
penicillin came
Yeah.
into play. So it's so sad this happened.
But I think a lot of the deaths were from the influenza itself, because it was, the autopsy showed that there was just hemorrhagic lungs.
Jerry, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, I have 2 comments about this part of the presentation. That estimate of 1/3 of the world's population being lost, I think historians like to throw that figure around. It's the same estimate of how many people the Black Death killed in the Middle Ages, 1/3 of the European population.
Well, this is just a third became infected, not that they died.
Which if it says here 1/3 of the world's population got the virus.
Yeah, but not
They didn't
everybody
die.
died.
Okay. And then I would add,
Died.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I have another comment, kind of humorous. Kathy didn't mention that when our own daughter first caught oysters here in Oxford in kind of brackish water, she contacted our nephew, who was a marine biologist, to ask if it was safe to eat them. And his answer was, only if you cook them and consume alcohol with them.
I'll remember that.
That was good.
Now, that's actually an interesting perspective. We have friends that are raising oysters off their docks. And that's not really, that's kind of brackish.
Yeah.
The dock is
It's on
located.
a river.
Yeah, like how close is that to where like Easton discharges its waste?
Oh, yeah, it's a long ways from.
Yeah, we have sewer systems nowadays.
Yeah.
But they don't do discharge raw. Well, you think of the ditch drain.
Well, look what they're doing in Trapp. They're agreeing to spray it on the fields, which will go into the groundwater.
That would be my biggest concern would be for having like oysters on a river. It wouldn't even be anything to do with the town waste. It would be more so I'd be worried about things coming off of nearby fields that gets rushed where it runs far away from farms.
Yeah, how good their sewage system is.
Because there's that,
they're not
and there's
on
also all the
city.
pesticides and all of the everything else, which I don't know if they actually transmitted by the oysters.
Wow. Okay, now.
And I brought up global
Maybe I want to go
warming.
for
Hey,
it.
that oyster season starts in October.
Good.
Okay, we'll get off
Don't let Kathy
oysters.
come to that.
Yeah, you're not invited.
Yeah, you're not invited to the oyster party.
Oh, come on. This just shows some of the death rates, mortality rates for Maryland. And what was interesting is now you can look at white mortality rate versus non-white. And one of the historians talked about, and I did double check it, there was segregation here.
Right.
So the hospital that took African Americans, the African American hospital was on the Western Shore. And
Interesting.
there was a black physician here who was treating people, but white medical practices would not see black patients. So
Well, like that, he came here in the thirties, what he would do, which probably made everybody was comfortable, was he would see the whites in the morning and the blacks in the afternoon.
that's,
And he would do it with that.
Yeah. I wonder how prevalent that was.
yeah.
Well, he was from northern Jersey, so, he didn't have the cultural background.
The
He
Eastern
was southern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting, though.
Yeah, and I also think this led to a movement to establish more care for African Americans.
Although the mortality rates for everything were still high.
Oh. Yeah, the rank of Maryland compared to other states in flu deaths was 2. We were the second highest state.
Wow.
I don't know if that's because we had more soldiers going overseas and coming, or, ships coming in and out.
So So influenza had nothing to do with mosquitoes, though.
No.
Yeah, so it's
terrible.
Yeah.
And also fomites. Sneeze, you cough.
Right. Close proximity to other people probably.
And touching things that they've sneezed and coughed on.
Yeah.
Picking
So the influenza came in 3 waves. There's the epidemic curve, and this is of the US. It shows the curve. On the Eastern Shore, the flu came also in 3 waves: September, late October, and December. And they have actually, for example, in Talbot County, there were 871 cases and 73 deaths. So they actually have county data at this point for the Eastern Shore. So what was the reaction? In October, the Eastern Town Council passed an emergency ordinance closing all schools, churches, theaters, billiard parlors, and bowling alleys. The public was warned not to congregate. Even the hospital was quarantined. And this photo is of the music hall that was in Easton at the time.
That's the old Avalon?
Is it the old hospital?
I didn't have time to, it was a musical and I thought it was torn down. So I found that to be interesting, that very similar to COVID.
Right. Yep.
But December came, right? Remember those curves? It went down because everything was closed. And the Daily Banner, the Cambridge newspaper, worst is past in the flu epidemic. Take a look at what they're saying.
I wouldn't put money.
No.
Not necessarily outdoors all the time.
Yeah.
So obviously on the Eastern Shore, things opened up.
And did it continue? Oh, now we get to see the result of opening up.
This is the same newspaper that said the worst is over.
Same stuff we've been going through.
Same.
I know, isn't it frustrating? We never seem to learn from history.
No.
We don't learn and adapt.
Well, I think the language that they use, and there's a lot, like in this, is interesting. It's very different. Nowadays, it's much more matter of fact, order from the governor. It's a very just kind of, this is the way it is. With this one, it almost, you can tell the person writing this, it's much more of a.
I feel that it's my duty.
It's a much more personalized, here's the reasons why I believe this is the best, versus simply.
Do it.
Yeah.
I feel like the way it was done this time around was just very different. It was much more of a forceful order versus this just has a different feel to it, I find. It's
The whole
interesting.
thing we may be compelled to take seriously. You're right. I guess
And-
it's more
And
tangible.
yeah, it's making it much more palatable sort of
Mhm.
language for people to hear then. Which is interesting, because yeah, it even says right there, like they may be forced to take steps to help, but they're not saying, you know, you must do this, you must do that, you cannot do this, cannot do that. They're just,
2020 hindsight is such a beautiful thing.
yeah,
I wish that at the start of COVID, that we had talked about that there's a lot about this we just simply do not know. And we may have to adapt as we learn more things. So
I think
it's
they did say that.
Fauci did a
Yeah,
very
he
good
did.
job.
of saying that.
Yeah.
But
He was filtered.
He was filtered, he was, right.
But
he was-
also the news grabs the headline.
Yes, and the news media doesn't help because they don't know anything about infectious disease.
And they don't put the nuances.
Yeah, yeah. So they,
See, this is nuanced.
yes, yeah.
and I think it would be very interesting to see back then how this went in terms of how people cooperated in comparison to today, as far as how, like, what the difference was. I wonder if there was more or less cooperation from the average person.
COVID was interesting because I remember hearing my brother in California talking about how he and his wife would put their masks on as they were walking into, from the parking lot to the grocery store, and people would make fun of them.
It was very politicized.
Yes, yes,
There
yeah.
was a major difference though in what was happening with the war then that influenced society. And this was brought up in what I read. The major articles in the newspapers were all about the war. So
And
the country was united against the war.
Common enemy, yeah.
We had a common enemy. So that was the first topic. This was the second topic.
Instead of COVID being the
Or
primary
instead of the
enemy.
conservative and the liberals being the enemy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like all Ukrainians came together against Russia. We come together against the war, and then this happened, but
Yeah,
it was the war we were concerned about first.
Yeah, nobody really, we had a hard time expressing this, like this is a war against a disease or
Right.
yeah.
And we've both worked with CDC, Jody and I with CDC, and they are very cut and dry. They don't write like this. Which the head of CDC has said they need to change. Okay, there were rumors, it was that Dea aspirin caused the flu because
Wow.
it was made in Germany. The French called it the Spanish flu, we did too. The Brazilians called it the German flu, I didn't know why. And the Spanish called it the French flu.
But in fact, it may have started in Kansas.
It's Kansas.
Kansas, it's the Kansas flu.
People turned to patent medicines, including laxatives and whiskey.
Oh, I like the whiskey part.
The railroad here gave each of its workers a pint of whiskey to ward off the flu.
Good examples, John.
Symptoms.
It works for a day. They said, well, hey, I'm flu-free for the day, but now what about tomorrow?
And people, just like patients with AIDS looked at African Americans because their rates were higher, but it was just because their death rates were higher because they weren't in care.
Yes, or maybe they were in closer proximity to one another.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, so it's interesting, the rumors. And Angela, how do you pronounce her name? She's taught me for this.
I think it's
before.
Reek,
Reek.
I think, because I want to say Reich which should be the German pronunciation, but I think
Reek.
I think Jody told me it was Reek.
She documented a lot of these rumors.
She's the one teaching the class on the dealing with life without a spouse.
Okay.
She's one of the two teaching it, yes.
So that's basically the rumors. This is a photo from the era. Looks familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, there was a nursing shortage.
Learn at home.
$50 to $25 per week, wow.
Yeah, you could earn that.
Any woman can do it.
Well, the physician will personally train you. assist you through training. Saves a lot of time, low tuition. So anyway,
When was this? That
Oh,
would have
wait.
been, that would have been, in the 20s or 30s?
wait a minute. Oh, what am I doing? I'm going back. No, this is
Oh,
during,
1902? Our system founded in 1902?
no, founded in this is during the flu pandemic, though.
Okay.
1918.
1918, 1917, 1918. Office and usual social advantages, though. That's how, I guess they
Meet
thought they
rich
did
doctors.
attract women. And then this is just, I thought I'd end with these websites. Now, can I do control?
If you just put them out here.
Just,
It should
yeah,
allow-
should be able to just click on it. I want you to know Jerry chose this moment to leave, so we can't tell if he can see it, but hopefully he can.
You've all heard about John Hopkins keeping track of COVID deaths and everything, and this is their website where this was from 2 days ago or something. It's recent.
What do they fully vaccinated is?
I think that's the 2, isn't it?
I think that's the 2. Yeah, because 68%. Yeah. And then these are the graphs that you saw in the beginning, but they're updated till till September. But the data is still lagging a bit. Let's see.
And the cases.
Oh, the case counts are now meaningless, pretty much. If you self-test at home, you're
Right, you have no way of knowing anymore, and
Right.
the self-test isn't really all that reliable, right? Don't you have to?
80%.
Yeah.
Now, can we go back to that other second graph? Because
I
that,
think you can click on the,
Where's it?
I think you can click on the X to the left, COVID overviews, that one.
okay, and then go here. And,
What's the difference here?
okay, I'll show you what's different. Oh, no. Okay, they have, in here, you can get into maps, which shows you the US
Compared to other countries.
compared to other states, or
Oh.
states within the US.
And even counties.
Yes, so you can get into counties. So it's a great website if you want to track
The Johns Hopkins website.
what Johns Hopkins website.
WBAL also. That, their website has.
What is that?
It's a TV station, but I've seen.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Oh,
some in the
WBAL.
New York Times, but they're all basing it
But you
from
can go,
this.
you can actually go to Talbot County and it'll tell you.
Oh, look at
Oh,
that.
yes, the US map.
Percent confidence.
And look at that, it says Johns Hopkins to change COVID tracking methods.
Right.
Wonder what they changed.
County.
Jerry, can you see this on your screen?
No,
No?
You don't
no,
see, you don't see a map?
no.
I think you need to go to share and
I
then.
saw the previous ones, but not this one.
Okay. So I think we have to
New
do a new share. To a screen. Yes.
That's gonna be her screen, the laptop. Let me just do the actual web page.
Okay. Okay, can you
Oh,
see
there
it?
it is.
So
Oh, look at the Southwest.
And look at deaths more than cases, because you're right, Peggy, it's the,
What color is deaths?
Well, the interesting thing that I see there is you're right, the Southwest, it looks like it's got a little more severe cases, but the interesting thing is in the Southwest, the temperatures stay so high and it's constant sunshine, which they've always talked
Wouldn't you
about.
think they'd be more outdoors?
Well, they would always talk about how UV light helps to kill the virus. It's harder for it to survive.
Yeah,
So you would assume, like I would assume that places like New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, places like that probably have much lower cases. Although I guess it's hard to tell from here, but I guess Los Angeles kind of takes up that big chunk right there. But
Are the darker colors more cases?
Yes,
Okay.
our concentration.
usually are.
yes.
But that's not Los Angeles, that'd be more San Diego, I think. Los Angeles would be on the right at the edge of the state.
But
'Cause it's on the
look
water.
look at the eastern shore. It's
Yeah.
quite- Can you enlarge that? Can you go to the county?
Yeah, it looks like you can.
Do a
So the
plus.
plus sign. Try that plus. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, there we go.
And then let's go.
Yeah, see,
Oh, yeah, look at
that's
that.
Talbot.
Whoops,
Is that Talbot? That's,
we're looking a little in the pink there.
Yeah.
Yes,
well, yeah. Let's see, that would be Talbot and what other county? That's another county.
is that below?
That's Dorchester.
Dorchester.
Why the
Look at all
dramatic
of Delaware,
difference?
my goodness.
Why the dramatic difference? I mean, you see the-
Chicken farms, not chicken farms, but yes, the workers on chicken farms are in close proximity to each other, I read. As one potential, that's why south of here
Oh, interesting.
and in Delaware,
Yeah.
too a bit.
They have a lot more in Delaware.
Delaware.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's why I
Yeah.
was really surprised.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's all that busing of immigrants here.
You know, the other thing about the Southwest, though, it's been a very hot summer there. So there's a lot of air conditioning.
Oh,
Yeah,
so
you don't
people are
go outside when it's 90
That's right.
degrees all the time.
Or,
I'm from South Texas.
110.
yeah, it's been in the hundreds for a long period of
Yeah.
time. So, yeah, that does make sense, that they would have been indoors for a while. Yeah. Yeah, because when we were in California a couple of weeks ago, everybody was inside. So it was just too hot, it was 115, and smoke in there.
So this is the end of the presentation.